Hi, welcome to Chapter 1 of Treasure Island. Make sure that you have your notes worksheets nearby and that you're ready to mark the text as we go along, and especially looking for vocabulary that you're going to enter onto your worksheet. Let's take a look at that for a minute, shall we? We've got sheets where you have to write a summary, and you're going to have to make a prediction after the chapter for the next one. You're going to have to analyze and evaluate what the author is trying to do in the chapter. So you're going to be thinking about what the author is trying to accomplish. You know, are they setting up mystery? Are they helping us understand what a character is like? What are they doing in the chapter? And then you're going to write what you like best. You're going to have to think hard sometimes. If you don't like the chapter, too bad. You're going to have to find something that's the best part of it. And then what do you wonder about? So what did it make you wonder about, like what's going to happen in the book, or about pirates in general, or England, or whatever it is you're wondering about, and what was difficult. And this is a hard book, and so there's always going to be something difficult, even if it's just the language, which can be very difficult indeed. On the back of each of those pages, you've got a section to write the major characters in it. There's only room for 3 in each of them, and sometimes there's more. And sometimes it seems like there weren't really 3 that they talked about a lot. But whatever 3 you can think of, you're going to write down. And then in the line next to it, you're going to write what they did. Now, below that, you've got a section for choosing 3 of the hardest or most interesting vocabulary words you would like to learn, writing them down, and then writing the dictionary definition that you find in the line next to it. Make sure that when you go back and you check the text, that the dictionary definition really works there, because some words have multiple meanings. And make sure you got the right one. In the space below, you're going to write or draw a picture that signifies something that has happened in the story thus far. So it needs to, when you look at the picture, make you think of that chapter. So think of something that's important to the chapter. It doesn't have to be great artwork. It can be stick figures. It can be like if you made the sign from the inn so that you can remember the name of the inn, you could do that too. It doesn't have to be very extravagant, but it should have enough detail so that when you look at it, you know what the chapter was about just by looking at the picture. And that will help you to stick it into your memory what it is you're reading. Okay, so now we're going to get started with the very first reading. There are 6 parts of the book, and each part has a number of chapters in it. And this is part 1. Part 1 is called The Old Buccaneer. Buccaneer is another word for like pirate. Okay, and chapter 1 is called The Old Sea Dog at the Admiral Benbow. Sea dog also could be like an old sailor, again, an old pirate. Okay, so let's get started. And notice that the voice that this is all told in, the person telling the story, is a young boy named Jim. Okay, so it's told in first person. So as I'm reading, most of the time I'm reading the voice of Jim unless there's dialogue. So read along, and we'll get through chapter 1 today. Squire Trelawney, Dr. Livesey, and the rest of these gentlemen, having asked me to write down the whole particulars about Treasure Island, from the beginning to the end, keeping nothing back but the bearings of the island, and that only because there is still treasure not yet lifted, I take up my pen in the year of grace, 17-something, it's left blank, and go back to the time when my father kept the Admiral Benbow Inn, and the brown old seaman with the saber cut first took up his lodging under our roof. I remember him as if it were yesterday, as he came plodding to the inn door, his sea chest following behind him in a hand barrow, which is like a wheelbarrow. A tall, strong, heavy, nut-brown man, his tarry pigtail falling over the shoulder of his soiled blue coat, his hands ragged and scarred with black broken nails, and the saber cut across one cheek, a dirty, livid white. I remember him looking round the cover and whistling to himself as he did so, and then breaking out in that old sea song that he sang so often afterwards. 15 men on the dead man's chest, yo ho ho, and a bottle of rum. In the high old tottering voice that seemed to have been tuned and broken to the capstan bars. It's on a ship. It's a part of the ship. If you remember, I did give you guys like a parts of ship diagram. That was a while ago, though. You might want to take a look. Then he rapped on the door with a bit of a stick like a handspike that he carried, and when my father appeared, called roughly for a glass of rum. This, when it was brought to him, he drank slowly like a connoisseur, lingering on the taste and still looking about him at the cliffs and up at our signboard. This is a handy cove, says he at length, and a pleasant sitiated grog shop. Much company, mate? My father told him no, very little company, the more was the pity. Well then, said he, this is the berth for me. Here you, matey, he cried to the man who trundled the barrow. Bring up alongside and help up my chest. I'll stay here a bit, he continued. I'm a plain man. Rum and bacon and eggs is what I want, and that head up there for to watch ships off. What you might call me? You might call me captain. Oh, I see what you're at there, and he threw down 3 or 4 gold pieces on the threshold. You can tell me when I've worked through that, says he, looking as fierce as a commander. And indeed, bad as his clothes were, and coarsely as he spoke, he had none of the appearance of a man who sailed before the mast, but seemed like a mate or skipper, accustomed to being obeyed or to strike. The man who came with the barrow told us the mail had set him down the morning before at the Royal George, that he had inquired what inns there were along the coast, and hearing ours well spoken of, I suppose, and described as lonely, had chosen it from the others for his place of residence, and that was all we could learn of our guests. Okay, so it's really important to understand that way back in these days, the mail was brought, of course, by stagecoaches, like we might have seen in the old Western movies, but like by a wagon that also brought sometimes people from place to place. So the post office was where each of the wagons or the horses or the mules that would bring the goods that were being shipped would stop and start from, or they might change to new horses. So the mail, being brought by the mail, means that you kind of like you were riding public transport. You were almost taking the bus from one place to another, only this one would be drawn by horses. So he had been dropped off in a region and then asked around where is a good place to stay, heard about the Admiral Benbow Inn, and that it was a place where not very many people went, and that's how he ended up there. So there's something to think about. He wants to stay there. He wants to be called captain. He wants rum and bacon and eggs, and rum's an alcoholic beverage. And he wants to be able to watch off the, like, he wants to be able to watch out over the cove, over the sea. So he needed a place like that. He sounds a little suspicious so far. Okay, let's continue. He was a very silent man by custom. All day he hung round the cove or up upon the cliffs with a brass telescope. All evening he sat in a corner of the parlor next the fire and drank rum and water very strong. Mostly he would not speak when spoken to, only look up sudden and fierce and blow through his nose like a foghorn. And we and the people who came about our house soon learned to let him be. Every day, when he came back from his stroll, he would ask if any seafaring men had gone by along the road. At first, we thought it was the want of company of his own kind that made him ask this question, but at last we began to see he was desirous to avoid them. When a seaman did put up at the Admiral Benbow, as now and then some did, making by the coast road for Bristol, he would look in at him through the curtained door before he entered the parlor, and he was always sure to be as silent as a mouse when any such was present. For me, at least, there was no secret about the matter, for I was, in a way, a sharer in his alarms. He had taken me aside one day and promised me a silver fourpenny on the first of every month if I would only keep my weather eye open for a seafaring man with one leg, and let him know the moment he appeared. Often enough, when the first of the month came round and I applied for him for my wage, he would only blow through his nose at me and stare me down. But before the week was out, he was sure to think better of it, bring me my fourpenny piece, and repeat his orders to look out for the seafaring man with one leg. How that personage haunted my dreams, I need scarcely tell you. On stormy nights, when the wind shook the four corners of the house and the surf roared along the cove and up the cliffs, I would see him in 1,000 forms and with 1,000 diabolical expressions. Now the leg would be cut off at the knee, now at the hip. Now he was a monstrous kind of creature who had never had but the one leg, and that in the middle of his body. To see him leap and run and pursue me over hedge and ditch was the worst of nightmares. And altogether, I paid pretty dear for my monthly fourpenny piece in the shape of these abominable fancies. So he's saying that the captain gave him silver some money to look out for a seafaring man with one leg. And he built it up in his imagination to be something pretty awful that he had nightmares about even. But he kept lookout for the man with one leg. But though I was so terrified by the idea of the seafaring man with one leg, I was far less afraid of the captain himself than anybody else who knew him. There were nights when he took a deal more rum and water than his head would carry, and then he would sometimes sit and sing his wicked old wild sea songs, minding nobody. But sometimes he would call for glasses round and force all the trembling company to listen to his stories, or bear a chorus to his singing. Often I have heard the house shaking with yo ho ho and a bottle of rum, all the neighbors joining in for dear life with the fear of death upon them, and each singing louder than the other to avoid remark. For in these fits he was the most overriding companion ever known. He would slap his hand on the table for silence all round. He would fly up in a passion of anger at a question, or sometimes because none was put. And so he judged the company was not following his story. Nor would he allow anyone to leave the inn till he had drunk himself sleepy and reeled off to bed. His stories were what frightened people worst of all. Dreadful stories they were, about hanging and walking the plank, and storms at sea, and the dry Tortugas, and the wild deeds and places on the Spanish Main. By his own account, he must have lived his life among some of the wickedest men that God ever allowed upon the sea. And the language in which he told these stories shocked our plain country people almost as much as the crimes that he described. My father was always saying the inn would be ruined, for people would soon cease coming there to be tyrannized over and put down, and sent shivering to their beds. But I really believe his presence did us good. People were frightened at the time, but on looking back, they rather liked it. It was a fine excitement in a quiet country life, and there was even a party of the younger men who pretended to admire him, calling him a true sea dog and a real old salt and such like names, and saying there was the sort of man that made England terrible at sea. So there he was every night drinking his rum and sometimes singing and telling stories and frightening the neighbors. But people kind of liked him because he was interesting. He was exciting to have around, even though he was just a little scary. In one way, indeed, he bade fair to ruin us, for he kept on staying week after week, and at last month after month, so that all the money had been long exhausted, and still my father never plucked up the heart to insist on having more. If ever he mentioned it, the captain blew through his nose so loudly that you might say he roared, and stared my poor father out of the room. I have seen him wringing his hands after such a rebuff, and I am sure the annoyance and the terror he lived in must have greatly hastened his early and unhappy death. Okay, so it's really important to just take a moment to notice that, because he's talking about how the captain never ended up paying more money, and it was really bothersome to his father, and his father wasn't very courageous about asking for it, and when he did, it was really a scary time. And then he says this thing about how it might have hastened his early and unhappy death. To hasten something is to make it hurry up. So this is a like foreshadowing, or kind of telling us ahead of time that Jim, the boy who's telling the story, his dad is going to die early, too early, and that maybe the captain's behavior had something to do with it. Okay. All the time he lived with us, the captain made no change whatever in his dress, but to buy some stockings from a hawker. One of the cocks of his hat having fallen down, he let it hang from that day forth, though it was a great annoyance when it blew. Okay, that's like a feather in his hat. Okay. I remember the appearance of his coat, which he patched himself upstairs in his room, and which before the end was nothing but patches. He never wrote or received a letter, and he never spoke with any but the neighbors, and with these, for the most part, only when drunk on rum. The great sea chest none of us had ever seen open. He was only once crossed, and that was towards the end, when my poor father was far gone in a decline that took him off. Dr. Livesey came late one afternoon to see the patient, took a bit of dinner from my mother, and went into the parlor to smoke a pipe until his horse could come down from the hamlet, for we had no stabling at the old Benbow. I followed him in, and I remember observing the contrast, the neat, bright doctor with his powder as white as snow, and his bright black eyes and pleasant manners made with the coltish country folk, and above all, with that filthy, heavy, bleared scarecrow of a pirate of ours, sitting far gone in rum, with his arms on the table. Suddenly he, the captain that is, began to pipe up his eternal song. 15 men on a dead man's chest, yo-ho-ho, and a bottle of rum. Drink and the devil had done for the rest, yo-ho-ho, and a bottle of rum. At first I had supposed the dead man's chest to be that identical big box of his upstairs in the front room, and the thought had been mingled in my nightmares with that of the one-legged seafaring man. But by this time we had all long ceased to pay any particular notice to the song. It was new that night to nobody but Dr. Livesey, and on him I observed it did not produce an agreeable effect, for he looked up for a moment quite angrily before he went on with his talk to old Taylor the gardener on a new cure for the rheumatics. In the meantime, the captain gradually brightened up at his own music, and at last flapped his hand upon the table before him in a way we all knew to mean silence. The voices stopped at once, all but Dr. Livesey's. He went on as before, speaking clear and kind and drawing briskly at his pipe between every word or two. The captain glared at him for a while, flapped his hand again, glared still harder, and at last broke out with a villainous low oath. "Silence there between decks!" "Were you addressing me, sir?" says the doctor. And when the ruffian had told him with another oath that this was so, "I have only one thing to say to you, sir," replies the doctor, "that if you keep on drinking rum, the world will soon be quit of a very dirty scoundrel." The old fellow's fury was awful. He sprang to his feet, drew and opened a sailor's clasp knife, and balancing it open on the palm of his hand, threatened to pin the doctor to the wall. The doctor never so much as moved. He spoke to him as before over his shoulder and in the same tone of voice, rather high, so that all the room might hear, but perfectly calm and steady. "If you do not put that knife this instant in your pocket, I promise upon my honor you shall hang at the next assizes." Assizes is a type of court, like almost like a county court. Okay. So he said that you'll hang. You're going to get in trouble from the judge and maybe die if you don't knock it off. Then followed a battle of looks between them, but the captain soon knuckled under, put up his weapon, and resumed his seat, grumbling like a beaten dog. "And now, sir," continued the doctor, "since I now know there's such a fellow in my district, you may count I'll have an eye upon you day and night. I'm not a doctor only, I'm a magistrate," which is a judge, by the way. "And if I catch a breath of complaint against you, if it's only for a piece of incivility like tonight's, I'll take effectual means to have you hunted down and routed out of this. Let that suffice." Soon after, Dr. Livesey's horse came to the door, and he rode away. But the captain held his peace that evening, and for many evenings to come. Okay. So when we go to our page here, in writing a summary, you're definitely going to want to mention the Admiral Benbow Inn, where they all are. You want to mention that the captain that he's called shows up and basically rents a room and puts down some money, but he doesn't keep paying. He just stays and he stays and he stays. Jim is watching for a one-legged seafaring man for him, and that's kind of important. And the captain likes to tell stories and scare everybody and drink a lot. And everybody's pretty intrigued by it, but nobody wants to mess with him. But one night, Dr. Livesey comes, and Dr. Livesey does not put up with him and threatens to prosecute him if he keeps up his bad behavior. Now, in the background, you can hear my grandson, and whenever you listen to this, you may be hearing some background noise, or you might see my dog, or you might see this happen because my dog walks by my computer. But that's because I'm doing this at my house, just like you're doing this at your house. And so it isn't perfect. We don't always have our perfect place to work, but we can get things done. Okay? All right, the next thing that you want to do is make a prediction about what might happen after this. So if you had an old dirty pirate living in your house and forcing everybody to sing and listen to his stories, what might be the next thing that might happen? And we also got a hint about Jim's dad. So that might be another thing that you could predict about. And think about, what is the author doing right now? What is his job? Robert Louis Stevenson is the author, and what is he doing right now in this chapter? What is he trying to do for us, the readers? And what did you like about it? Okay, so what was interesting or funny or whatever? Now, what did you wonder about? And what was hard? What was difficult? There probably were some words that you should be writing down. So look back at the text and write some of them, pick out 3 to write down as your vocabulary. Also, the characters that you might want to choose to write, let's take Jim, the narrator. What did he do during this? Certainly the captain, the old sea dog, might be very important. And then the third one, I don't know, you might want to say Jim's dad, but what about Dr. Livesey at the end? He seems like a pretty important character. So write one of those down and then write what they did. And then your picture, what was the most important part? The old sea dog arriving at the Admiral Benbow, Dr. Livesey having a kind of a stare down with them. In your packet, you had a picture already. I don't think it's going to be very clear here, but it has Dr. Livesey kind of telling him off at the Admiral Benbow. So that might be like a nice like a inspiration if you want to. Okay. All right. And that is chapter 1. I'll see you for chapter 2 if you need to read that one too.